honored to be able to work with patients and families who are going through end of life. And I'd like to share some of those learnings with you. And my personal learnings in life too. Doris, that was an excellent presentation, and I'm so relieved my sisters are not in the audience, because I have to admit, I am on joint account with my mother, and I grew up saying I'm an only child with two sisters. So what adds to more family dynamics to that is my one sister is a chartered accountant, and she's married to a lawyer. So. But actually, so far, so good. The other conflicts that can arise that Doris alluded to as well is regarding healthcare matters. So what is important to talk about and to know? So I can guarantee, statistically, 100% of us will die. So that's just basic life knowledge, but we're scared of what that might look like for us. If there's 100 of us, it looks like about 100 of us total in the audience right now, 15 of us will die suddenly, unexpectedly, whether it's a massive heart attack or a young person in a motor vehicle accident. But 85 of us, so 85% of us, will go through life changes in different ways, maybe cancer, where over time cancer will cause death, or it could be from kidney failure, where someone has dialysis and that's draining the person's body's health, or heart disease. And it could also be older age. Frailty is becoming more known as a common health issue, where it's not one specific disease, it's a combination of health issues. So advanced care planning and goals of care designations, what you, your family, and healthcare team need to know. This is really important, that it's a team, family approach to honoring your wishes. So we will talk about advanced care planning. What is it? For who? Who's involved? And in our healthcare system, how is this translated? How do we communicate that between the healthcare team? So just think about this. What if your mother has a stroke and cannot talk? Are you going to know what her wishes for her life and that time in her life would be? Or what if your son is in an accident, cannot talk? Doctors tell you he will never be able to live alone again. How would he want to live if he can't be that voice for himself? And I can actually share with you a situation where a 35-year-old young man was riding his bike, was hit and run situation. He was in ICU. Friends in the area and family over phone, because his parents, his next of kin, were actually in Ontario, said that if he could not return to the state he was to communicate in a meaningful way, he wouldn't want to be kept alive. And being kept alive meant the healthcare team thought he could live, but would require tube feeding and nursing home care to live in that state. And the friends and family said he wouldn't want to, and he did not have a personal directive. So the family had to drive out from Ontario because they didn't have finances to fly, and then they had to go to the courts for appealing for guardianship because the healthcare team did not feel comfortable, never knowing him before, if those would really be his wishes. So that's why it's so important, like Doris was sharing with us, to have that personal directive. Or think, if you're diagnosed with a disease where you will need to be fed by a tube or have machines breathe for you. And I can share with you, when our son was about 18 years old, and I've been a palliative care nurse for over 25 years now, and I shared with my family, so I said, it's important to know that for me, because everyone is different, but for me, if I'm in a health situation where I can't communicate in a meaningful way, so I don't know that you're with me, and I can't communicate in that shared way, I wouldn't want to be kept alive unnaturally. And my son said, well, actually, I wouldn't want to make that decision to say that. I would still want to see you every day, because I would still be able to come see you even if you were in a nursing home, because I would see you even and still talk to you. Now, I think his reason was I wouldn't be able to nag like I usually do and tell him what to do. But that was really enlightening to me, because I never thought of this. But then what I said was, well, that doesn't matter, because Dad will be the one then to make the decision and speak for me, so he would say. And my husband said, then I don't want to be your agent legally, because we have an only child. But again, talking like Doris did about relationships and conflict, my husband said, if I have to, even though I may think like Alec, our son, I know as an agent, I have to be your voice, even though I'm uncomfortable with it, and be strong enough to say what you would want. But I could do that. But if I did that, we might not have a relationship afterwards. So I value being with our son. So that's where I have a really good friend that's able to make that decision for me and be my voice. And she's also then knowing she'll do her best to support. And I think that's changed over the years, because our son will be 27 and I don't nag quite as much, so I'm hoping. But those are things to consider in these healthcare decisions. So fewer than half of Canadians have had a discussion with their family or friends what healthcare treatments they would want or not want, and could not communicate. But only 2 in 10 of us actually know what advanced care planning is. And a lot of the time, even when I asked my husband a few years ago, what do you think advanced care planning is, when I was starting to do these presentations, he's in finance, and he said it's having your will in order and talking about your funeral arrangements. He had no idea it was related to healthcare issues. That's really an important piece to it. 80% of people say that if they were seriously ill, they would want to talk to their doctor about healthcare wishes, but only about 9% of us have actually done that. So much like we would have a lawyer that we can go to complete all of our documents, we see our family doctor on a frequent basis. That's the go-to person to be able to be your voice in a situation if you end up in emergency, if they know to be able to contact your family physician. So it's really important to think about what your wishes and values are. Learn about your own health. And that means if you're diagnosed with kidney disease and the doctor's talking to you about, we think you need dialysis, ask those questions back. What would that look like for me if I need dialysis? What do my days, my weeks, my months look like? So try to understand more, and then choose someone to make decisions on your behalf. Communicate your wishes and document in a personal directive. The other thing that's really important is when you do your personal directive, make a copy of it and give it to your agent. And that way it's not in that safety deposit box where no one else may not have access to it. And the other thing is, if you have a serious health condition, or you're admitted to the hospital for any reason, you will likely have what's called a green sleeve started, this green folder where your health decisions will be recorded by a medical prescription, we call it. A doctor or nurse practitioner will write on here, what's the focus of care that should be given, so that way the team all knows how to focus the care. But keep a copy of your personal directive in here as well, because this green sleeve should be your green sleeve that goes with you. So if you go back home, this stays on the fridge or by the fridge, because if 911 is called, the first place the paramedics will go to is the fridge to look for your green sleeve. So all your important documents should be in here. That's a really good go-to place. The Alberta Health Services website, so we know we can go to that. But they also have an app that you can download on your smartphone, Alberta Health Services app. So that's the same app on the smartphone that you can find the waiting times for different emergency rooms. But at the very bottom of that table of contents is actually the link to advanced care planning as well. So that's a really good go-to. The other thing I'd like to remind you about is on your smartphone that you have the ability to put in your medical information, your emergency contacts. So that way, even if it's a lock screen, there in the bottom right hand on the iPhone, there's that emergency that everybody's scared to push because they think that'll go right to 911. But when you actually hit that, and this is my work phone, so it won't do that, but on my personal phone, it'll actually open up what my health situation is, my allergies, and my emergency contacts with their phone number. So that's a really good piece of health information, because not all of us carry our green sleeves with us when we go to the mall and have our emergency information with us if something was to happen, and how to get a hold of our family. So utilize your smartphones. It really is a great resource. So what we already know, at the time of death, almost half of us will require important decisions to be made, but close to 3/4 of the time, we won't be able to make those decisions. Someone else will have to for us. And we already spoke about the personal directive. What's really important is every time you go to the hospital, even for an outpatient appointment, remember they'll always ask you, what's your contact number? Is your address correct? Who's your emergency contact? What you might not know behind the scenes, unless you look at that sheet that they print out, is on that sheet, they actually have to ask you, do you have a personal directive? And they will also ask, do you have a copy with you that we can put on your chart? And why I have the other arrow there for contact person, as a healthcare person, when I go to meet with patients and families, almost always that emergency contact person is not the agent for your personal directive. Especially if we're going in for an outpatient procedure, say a colonoscopy, it's maybe the person that, because it's not a concerning procedure necessarily, you may have someone coming to pick you up, and that's the name and the number of the person. But if something was to go wrong, or there's important information that needs to be shared right away, you would want that important person available to be part of that conversation. So make sure you're giving the hospital and your family doctor that information. The goals of care designation, that's that form within the green sleeve that's filled out by the physician or nurse practitioner. And what's important about that goals of care designation is, in Alberta, we audit the hospital charts to look, and not everyone's chart, just some of the charts we'll look at. So for those patients, 98% of the time, a person in the hospital will have a goals of care designation written down, meaning that's what the team thinks that you want for your care. But when we were interviewing the patients themselves, only about 30% of the time did they equal. So it's really important that you ask, do you have a goals of care designation in my chart? And I just want you to explain to me what you've written there, just to make sure that you have the information you need to honor my wishes based on what my health situation is. It already taught to resuscitative care, so that is usually in an ICU setting. And the important thing to remember, they're trying to cure or control what's happening with your health. Now, ICU, a lot of people think that you're going to be the same person you were before you came into ICU. This isn't the case in all situations. So it's really important, again, to know what ICU is able to do for you and what your life will be like after ICU. And what's important to know about ICU is often when you're going to ICU, you're so ill to begin with, you may be quite confused, especially if you think of when you've had the flu so bad. So that one individual that said he had sepsis, an infection, most people develop confusion when they're in ICU. So that becomes very scary for people because things that aren't real seem very real. So those hallucinations and those nightmares. It's really important if someone has dementia and family is saying, I would want to try ICU, to have the conversation with the doctor, because often as dementia progresses, you get confused. And being in ICU, where you're going to be more confused, can be even more terrifying. And what happens then, when you have all these special IVs that are going into your arms, into your neck, and you have all these other tubes, breathing tubes, tubes in your bladder to drain, maybe feeding tubes. When you're confused, the first thing you do is you panic and you're trying to pull all those tubes out. That can be very dangerous. So then you're given even more medications trying to keep you settled. That's why it's important to ask these questions. What will that look like? Or what do you expect to happen? So medical care is still about trying to cure or control situations. So if you have a horrible pneumonia that needs IV antibiotics instead of antibiotics by pill, that would be medical care. Comfort care means we can't cure or control the situation anymore. So if you develop a pneumonia and an IV antibiotic might not be possible, and you don't want to go into the hospital for that, then you can have medications to keep you comfortable if those infections, for instance, are causing you to be uncomfortable. So what do healthcare providers want to know? They want to know what matters to you most. What's important to you? Is it important you're able to walk, talk, feed yourself? What do you worry about or fear what will happen if you get very sick? Are there certain medical treatments you don't want? There's some faiths that do not want blood transfusions. That's very important to know. Do you have beliefs that affect these choices? The conversation, what to share with your doctor, what are those important milestones? So maybe to prolong life a little bit, if you need blood transfusions because there's a month away for your granddaughter's wedding, talk to your healthcare team about those important things. And who your decision maker is, start bringing them to your appointments so they know what's happening in your life. Questions to ask if you have a chronic illness. What can I expect my life to look like with this illness 1 month from now? What are some possible big changes in my health and I and my family should be prepared for? What could I expect if I choose this or another treatment? What if, for instance, the dialysis? What if I don't do dialysis? And what can I expect if I do nothing? What if my illness gets worse? How will I let my family know? Can I change treatment goals and goals of care designation? Yes, with conversations. Can I still have surgery? Yes, and a good example would be we have patients that are in our hospice palliative care units that may have just a few weeks or a few months of life, and say they fall and they break their hip. That's causing horrendous pain. If they are stable enough to have surgery to fix that hip to make them more comfortable, we can move them to the hospital to have that surgery and then they go back to hospice. But we should always have the conversation about what the risks of surgery are. That person's body might just not be able to tolerate what the surgery goes through and they may die during surgery. So it's those conversations. And we talked about the green sleeve. The only document we didn't talk about in the green sleeve is the middle one here, and that's the conversation document. That's where the doctors and nurses should be summarizing those important conversations they're having with you, so hopefully you don't have to repeat your story all over again, what your wishes are. And you have the handout about the various resources available. And on the back of that handout is a Canadian website where you can actually complete a number of questions and it makes a letter that you can print off and take to your doctor and share with your doctor some of these important questions and answers that you've done. And the Alberta Health Services website with all of these videos, Conversations Matter. And there's the Alberta Health Services, My Health Alberta also has a palliative care website with all the resources wherever you are in the province. The other thing I wanted to point out related to personal directives and goals of care designation, it's not the same across the country. So if you have family that are in different parts of the country or the world, have those conversations, because the power of attorney in Ontario is our equivalent of the personal directive here. So we had one son that came from Ontario, and he said, I need the doctors to sign the form so I can enact the power of attorney. It was really the personal directive he was talking about. And the goals of care designation for resuscitative care in BC is called comfort care here. So it's called C goals of care designation here is our comfort care. A C goals of care designation in BC is critical care, meaning I want ICU. So it's, again, very important if you've got family or you're traveling back and forth to have those conversations. So don't wait, the time will never be just right. And talk with your doctor, those important to you, and use your green sleeve. Thank you very much.